The car was nothing but a heap of scrap metal in everyone's eyes, paint stripped to bare rust, frame corroded at every seam, the interior rotted through beyond saving. Liam Harper bought it for $120 at a liquidation auction, and not a single person thought to ask why. No one believed he knew something they didn't. But Evelyn Holt, CEO of Holt Motors, humiliated him in front of a crowd, in front of a news camera, in front of his 7-year-old daughter. She ordered that car crushed. That was the most expensive mistake of her life. Could Liam Harper protect that rusted car and his dignity before the tow truck took everything away from him forever? The morning started the way most mornings did in the Harper house, quietly, practically, without ceremony. Liam stood at the kitchen counter with his back to the window while the coffee brewed, watching a thin ribbon of steam curl up from the machine and dissolve into the pale light coming through the curtains. Behind him, Arya sat at the table with her cereal bowl, spoon moving in slow circles, while her stuffed horse sat propped against the sugar dish, as though it too had a place at the breakfast table. The horse was small and brown, its coat worn down to the nap from years of being carried and clutched and slept on, and Arya had named it Dusty when she was 4 years old, and had not seen any reason to change that since. Liam watched her out of the corner of his eye and said nothing about Dusty at the table, because some things were simply part of the rhythm of the house, and the rhythm of the house was the thing he guarded most carefully. He was 38 years old and had been a single father for 3 of those years, and in those 3 years he had learned that the structure of a morning mattered more than most people gave it credit for. Arya's mother had died in February, on a Tuesday, during a week when the furnace was broken and the pipes in the bathroom had been leaking for a month, and Liam had spent the weeks after the funeral fixing everything he could reach with his hands, because there were things he could not fix, and the feeling of standing still inside them was unbearable. He had rebuilt the kitchen table, replaced the furnace himself, recaulked every window in the house, and at some point in all of that, he had also, without planning it, built a life for the two of them, something small and careful and entirely their own. Arya was 7 now, and the morning routine was one of the things he held to with both hands. He poured his coffee and turned around. Arya was telling Dusty something in a low, private voice, one that was not meant for him, and he respected the privacy of the conversation and sat down across from her with his mug. Arya looked up and said, "Dad, can I come with you today?" School was out, and he had no one else to leave her with. He told her yes, and he told her to stay close and not to run, because the place they were going would be crowded and full of strangers. Arya nodded with a seriousness that made her look older than 7, and she squeezed Dusty once, not out of fear, but with the deliberate gravity of someone making a promise in front of a witness. In the backyard, hooked behind the truck, the flatbed trailer sat loaded and ready, and on it, covered in a canvas tarp secured with 4 bungee cords at each corner, was the car. He had bought it 3 weeks ago, and had not told anyone, not because he was hiding it, but because there was no one in his life who would have understood immediately, and understanding immediately was the only kind of telling that ever felt right to him. He stood in the backyard for a moment with his coffee and looked at the shape under the tarp, and the morning light moved across the canvas in a way that made the covered form look almost like something sleeping. His wife would have laughed. She would have told him he was the only man alive who could look at a heap of scrap iron and see something worth protecting. That had not been a criticism. It had been the truth. Liam lifted Arya into the cab of the truck. She tucked Dusty under her arm, looked out through the windshield with the wide and interested eyes of a child going somewhere new, and Liam started the engine. The truck and its trailer rolled out onto the road, into the pale early light of a morning that had not yet decided what it was going to be. 3 weeks earlier, the morning had been gray and cold and smelled of turned earth, and Liam had driven 40 minutes outside the city to a farm liquidation auction he had found listed in a trade newsletter that very few people still subscribed to. These were the kinds of auctions that existed at the margins of the collector world, not the glamorous estate sales with printed catalogs and preview nights, but the practical, unglamorous disposal of assets from farms and properties that no longer had anyone to tend them. The lots were listed in blunt, indifferent language. Farm equipment unspecified, hand tools, various condition, furniture assorted, miscellaneous metal, as is. He had driven out for a set of vintage socket wrenches listed in Lot 42, and he had found something else entirely. The auctioneer was working through the back of the barn when Liam arrived, dispatching lots at a pace that suggested he wanted to be done before noon. At the far end of the property, under a collapsed lean-to, sat what the printed sheet described as unidentified scrap metal, no documents, condition unknown. It was listed last, as an afterthought, the kind of item auction houses include only to avoid leaving it for the county to haul away. Most of the crowd had already moved on to a cluster of old engine parts near the fence. Nobody was paying attention to the shape under the lean-to. Liam paid attention. He walked toward it slowly, not because he was being cautious, but because he had learned long ago that speed communicated uncertainty, and he was not uncertain about anything he was doing. The shape was large and low to the ground, and completely obscured by 3 decades of accumulated grime, dried mud, and a partial canvas that had rotted to the point of being decorative rather than protective. He crouched at the driver's side, reached into his jacket pocket for the small flashlight he kept there out of habit, and swept the beam along the lower edge of the body where the rocker panel met the door sill. Then he moved the light toward the area just forward of the left front wheel, angling it until he found the chassis tag. He wiped it with his sleeve, once. The first 3 characters were CSX. The number following began with 3. He stood up, put the flashlight back in his pocket, walked back toward the auctioneer without hurrying, without looking back. The opening price for the unidentified scrap was $80. No bids. The auctioneer tried 60. Still nothing. A man in the back called out, 100. Liam raised his hand. 120. There was a pause long enough to suggest everyone was waiting to see if someone would go higher. No one did. The hammer came down. He drove home with the car on the flatbed, and the drive felt ordinary from the outside. A man in a work truck pulling a covered trailer on a county road in the early afternoon. That evening, after Arya was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and looked up the chassis number. The results came back in a way that caused him to sit very still for a long time. The 1965 Shelby Cobra 427 was one of the rarest production automobiles ever built in the United States. Carroll Shelby had produced the 427 variant in extremely limited numbers before the production line closed in 1967, approximately 300 examples, each carrying a unique chassis number prefixed CSX, which stood for Carroll Shelby Experimental. Auction records from the previous decade showed comparable examples selling between $1.5 million and $2.5 million. Fully restored, with documented provenance, the figure could exceed $3 million. Liam sat in the kitchen for a while longer after reading all of that, and then he closed the laptop, turned off the light, and went to bed. The Holt Motors Charity Classic Car Showcase was the kind of event that had been designed to communicate several things at once: civic generosity, brand authority, and the implicit suggestion that anyone affiliated with Holt Motors had impeccable taste. It took place annually in the plaza fronting the company's regional headquarters, a glass and steel building that occupied half a city block, and on the morning of the event, the space had been transformed with sponsor banners, roped-off display zones, and a small stage where a string quartet played music that floated across the plaza with the cheerful purposefulness of atmosphere purchased in advance. A camera crew from a local financial news outlet was already on site, following Evelyn Holt's communications team for what was being positioned as a brand profile piece. Liam had been contracted as a support mechanic. His role was straightforward: transport 3 vintage vehicles belonging to private collectors, assist with any mechanical issues during the show, and remain on site until the event closed. The contract was quiet, professional work, the kind that made up the reliable middle of his calendar. He had loaded the client's cars that morning and had brought his own truck and trailer because the flatbed was already hitched, and he did not like leaving the Cobra at the house when he would be gone all day. He was not planning to display it. He simply did not want it out of his sight. Jackson Reeve met him at the entrance to the staging area, a lean, well-dressed man in his mid-40s who carried a clipboard and wore a wireless earpiece and had the manner of someone who treated the logistics of a public event as though they were operations in a theater of war. He looked at Liam's truck. He looked at the tarp-covered shape on the flatbed. He looked at Liam. "You're the support mechanic?" he said. Liam confirmed this. Jackson handed him a parking diagram and told him the designated area for support personnel was in Zone C, at the back of the plaza, away from the primary display areas. He added, "And whatever that is on the trailer, keep it out of the sight line from the main entrance. We have press positioning up front." Liam took the diagram and drove to the designated zone. He parked, stepped out, and began his contracted work with the economy of motion that comes from doing a thing many times unhurried, precise, uninterested in being noticed. Arya climbed down from the cab and stood in the staging area with Dusty under her arm, looking at the vehicles being moved into position across the plaza with the clear, undisguised wonder of a child in the presence of beautiful things. "Dad," she said, "they're all so beautiful." Liam set a hand briefly on her shoulder. "Beautiful things that don't know they're beautiful," he told her, "are the most valuable ones." Arya looked up at him with the expression of a child filing a sentence away for later, and he left her on a low concrete step near the truck where he could see her, and went back to work. Evelyn Holt arrived at the plaza at 10:30, moving through the event space with the practiced efficiency of someone who had given the same tour many times and knew exactly which angles photographed well. She wore a dove-gray pencil skirt and a structured jacket, and her presence rearranged the behavior of everyone around her in the subtle, reflexive way that seniority always did. People straightened, conversations shortened, eyes redirected. The journalist from the news outlet walked alongside her with a small camera crew, catching the walkthrough for the brand profile piece. She reached the support zone at the rear of the plaza while making a circuit of the event perimeter, and that was where she saw the trailer. The canvas tarp had been partially pulled back on one side. Liam had been checking a tie-down strap and had not yet repositioned it, and the exposed section of the car caught the morning light in a way that was difficult to ignore. The raw, corroded bodywork, the surface of what had once been paint, the dull gleam of oxidized metal where the finish had fallen away entirely. Evelyn stopped walking. She looked at the car, then she looked at Liam, who was crouched beside one of the collector vehicles with a rag in his hand, working without awareness of her presence. Then she looked at Jackson, who had materialized at her shoulder as he generally did. "What is that?" she said, and the direction of the question made clear it was not being asked of the man whose car it was. Jackson began to explain that it appeared to belong to the support mechanic, and Evelyn was already moving toward the trailer before he had finished the sentence. She stood beside the exposed bodywork and looked at it the way a person looks at something they consider a problem to be removed, rather than an object to be understood. The journalist's camera was still recording. Evelyn's voice carried with the natural projection of someone accustomed to being listened to without making any special effort. "This is Holt Motors class. A charitable showcase," she said, audible to everyone in the immediate area. "Not a salvage yard." Liam stood up from beside the collector's vehicle. He set down the rag, straightened to his full height, and said, "That car is my personal property, ma'am. I'm parked in the designated zone." There was nothing conciliatory or defensive in his voice. He was simply giving her accurate information. Evelyn looked at him with the kind of attention she reserved for people who had failed to understand the social structure they were operating in, and her gaze moved from his face to his work clothes and back to the trailer. "Your personal property," she said, repeating the phrase in a register that questioned its applicability. She looked at the pocked and blistered bodywork, the exposed chassis rail that had gone the color of old pennies, the interior visible through the open frame where the door glass had long since gone. "What did you pay for this? $20? Or did they give you extra to haul it away?" A small, approving sound moved through the nearest observers. The camera kept running. Arya was standing 10 feet away, Dusty pressed against her chest, watching the woman in the gray jacket with the quiet, focused attention children give to things they sense are dangerous before they can articulate why. Liam did not look at his daughter. He kept his eyes on Evelyn. $120, he said. The directness of the answer, no apology, no qualification, no embarrassment caused something in Evelyn's expression to shift for just a fraction of a moment. Then she smiled, turned slightly toward the journalist, and let the amusement enter her voice fully. $120. She let the number sit. This is the level of asset currently on display at my company's charity event. Arya tightened her grip on Dusty. She did not make a sound. Evelyn turned back to Jackson and spoke quietly enough that it would not be captured cleanly on camera, but not quietly enough that Liam could not hear. She wanted the car removed from the event area before the primary sponsors arrived at 11. A tow if necessary. Jackson moved toward Liam and adopted the tone of a man who needed compliance and had decided that reasonable-sounding firmness would produce it. "You'll need to relocate your personal vehicle off the event grounds." Liam said, "I have a contract for today. My vehicle is in the zone your organization assigned." Jackson said, "Your contract covers mechanical services, not personal vehicle storage." Liam said, "Show me the language in the contract that prohibits it." Jackson did not have that language because it did not exist, and so he pulled out his phone and made a call instead. And the conversation stalled at the edge of confrontation while Jackson arranged something at a distance. Evelyn moved back toward the journalist but kept her peripheral attention on the staging area, the way someone does when they have delegated a task and need to confirm it has been completed. Liam waited. The morning had continued to warm around them, and guests were beginning to arrive at the front of the plaza, and the string quartet carried faintly across the open space. After a moment, Liam stepped closer to Jackson, kept his voice low, and said, "You don't understand what that car is, and if you send a tow truck, both you and Miss Holt will be dealing with a legal situation that no one in your company's counsel is going to be able to untangle in a day." Jackson looked at him. He looked at the trailer. Nothing about the rust-covered bodywork told him anything except that it was old and in bad condition. "Is that a threat?" he said. Liam said, "That is information." Jackson finished his second call and told Liam a flatbed tow truck had been dispatched and would arrive in approximately 15 minutes, and that Liam was to have the vehicle accessible for loading. Then he walked away, because he had done what he had been asked to do, and he did not enjoy standing near someone who made him feel uncertain. Arya came to stand beside her father without being called. She placed herself at his side with Dusty against her chest, which was the thing she did when she was worried, not asking to be held, just needing the closeness of him. Liam set one hand briefly on her hair, a single unhurried contact, and then he was looking at the Cobra again, with the expression of a man not panicking, but thinking clearly, precisely, with the focus that arrives when time is short and the situation is genuinely serious. 15 minutes was not long. He had a lawyer he could call, but the lawyer would not answer for 20. He could begin moving the car himself, but getting it off the flatbed alone was not fast, and he had no help. He understood that what was about to happen was being allowed to happen, and that the only thing standing between the Cobra and a tow yard was him. The tow truck arrived in 12 minutes, not 15, a large commercial flatbed that came around the corner of the building with the grinding authority of heavy equipment operating under instruction. The crowd nearest the staging area parted. The journalist's camera operator, sensing something more interesting than a walkthrough, repositioned toward the action. The tow truck idled, the driver climbed out, and looked at Jackson, who pointed at the trailer. Liam stepped in front of the Cobra. He did not raise his hands. He did not speak. He stood in the space between the car and the advancing cable, the way a person stands in a doorway when they are not going to move, and the tow truck driver looked at him and stopped. The driver was a working man, practical and unhurried, and he had no interest in a confrontation he hadn't been briefed on. He looked at Jackson. Jackson looked at Evelyn, who had come back into the staging area when word reached her that the situation had not resolved cleanly. Evelyn said, "Move aside." It was not a loud request, but it was a definite one. Liam said, "No." She looked at him with the expression of someone confronting a type of resistance they had genuinely not anticipated. "You're obstructing a legitimate operation on private property," she said. "I can have the police here in 10 minutes." Liam said, "Please do." He said it without sarcasm, and the absence of sarcasm was more unsettling than sarcasm would have been. Evelyn looked at the gathered crowd. She looked at the camera. She considered what the image would look like, the CEO of a regional automotive company, summoning law enforcement over a parking dispute with a mechanic, and the consideration was not comfortable, but she was also standing in front of her employees and her guests, and she had not built a career of any length by reversing course in public without something concrete to justify it. Arya made a sound, not a cry, not a shout. It was the quiet, fragile sound of someone trying not to cry and losing that effort, and tears ran down her face without any accompanying noise. And she was not looking at Evelyn at all. She was looking at the tow truck driver directly, openly, with the undefended appeal of a child who has not yet learned that the person operating the machinery is not the one making the decision. "Please don't break my dad's car," she said. "It's his. He bought it." The tow truck driver's hand stopped moving toward the winch control. He looked at the girl. He looked at Liam. He looked at the car. He did not move. Evelyn did not look at Arya. She looked at Jackson and said, "Continue." Liam crouched to his daughter's eye level. His voice was low enough that only she could hear it, and the crowd around them went quiet in the particular way. Crowds go quiet when something private becomes briefly visible through the surface of a public scene. "Look at me," he said. Arya looked at him, eyes red, tears still coming. Dusty gripped until the stuffed animal's seams strained. "I'm all right," he told her, "and this car is going to be all right. I promise you that." She nodded not because she was certain he was right, but because she trusted him, and those were not always the same thing, and she had learned that, at 7, without being taught. He stood up. He turned to face Evelyn, and the crowd, and the camera that was still recording, and he spoke clearly and without theatrics. "You are about to make the most expensive mistake of your life, not because I'll take you to court, but because 10 years from now, you will still remember this morning." Evelyn held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she said, with a lightness in her voice that was working considerably harder than it appeared to, "I'll send you a check for $120 this afternoon." She waved a hand at the tow truck driver. The cable began to unspool toward the trailer, and at that precise moment, a voice from outside the ring of the crowd cut through everything, not a shout, not a raised pitch, a single word, in the tone of someone who has said it in rooms where it mattered and been listened to every time. "Stop." Diana Weston had not planned to leave the main display area that morning. She had come to the Holt Motors Charity Classic Car Showcase as a guest of honor, an invitation extended by the event's planning committee, because her name on a program added a layer of credibility that her hosts valued even if they did not fully understand the scale of what she did. Diana was the kind of person who existed at the intersection of expertise and irreproachability. She had authenticated vehicles for the Smithsonian Collection, she had published in 4 consecutive issues of Automobile Quarterly, and she had declined consulting offers from 3 major manufacturers because she did not work for organizations that required her to agree with them. When Holt Motors extended an invitation, she had accepted because the drive was pleasant, and she had heard there was a 1957 Benz on the display floor she wanted to examine in person. She had heard the commotion from the far side of the plaza, not clearly enough to parse the specifics, but distinctly enough to know that its texture was wrong for a charity showcase. She came around the edge of the guest crowd and saw the tow truck, and she saw the cable, and she saw the car. Diana Weston stopped walking. She had been moving at a brisk pace, and the stopping was absolute. She looked at the shape on the trailer, the exposed bodywork, the corroded metal, the silhouette of something that was not what it appeared to be to people who had not spent 40 years learning what things appeared to be. She covered the remaining distance in 10 seconds. She crouched at the lower edge of the body near the left front wheel and looked without touching. She ran 2 fingers along the frame rail. She straightened. Then she said, "Stop." The tow truck driver stopped. The word had been delivered with the specific register of authority that people respond to instinctively. Not volume or anger, but absolute certainty, and he responded to it the way a person responds to the smell of smoke before they understand what is burning. Evelyn turned to face the interruption and began to say something about the coordination of the event, and Diana said, "No, simply that." She was already moving around the car in a slow and deliberate circuit, her eyes traveling across the bodywork with the focused attention of a person reading something written in a language only they command. She reached into her breast pocket and removed a small folding magnifier, the kind she had carried for so long that reaching for it was as automatic as breathing. She crouched near the chassis tag. She held the glass up. She read what was there, and she was quiet for a moment, in the way that people go quiet when they are confirming something they already suspected. Then she stood, turned to face Evelyn Holt, and her expression was not dramatic and not unkind. It was the expression of someone who is about to give accurate information to a person who has been operating without it. "May I borrow a handkerchief?" she said. Evelyn produced one. The crowd was entirely silent. Diana crouched beside the car, positioned the cloth, and began to clean a section of the chassis with the methodical care of someone for whom this motion was entirely familiar. And everyone, including Evelyn Holt, held still and waited. Diana straightened and returned the handkerchief without comment. She turned to face the assembled crowd, not as a performer faces an audience, but as a person faces a room when they intend to make a factual statement and want everyone present to hear it without interruption. "This is a 1965 Shelby Cobra 427, she said, and she read the full chassis number aloud, digit by digit. "This is not a reproduction. It is not a kit car built from a donor chassis. This is an original production vehicle." The sound that moved through the crowd was not dramatic. It was the specific murmur of people who know enough to understand what they have just heard, adjusting in real time to a situation that has become different from the one they thought they were standing in. Several of them reached for their phones. Others turned to the people beside them in the low, urgent way of those sharing information they cannot quite contain. Diana continued, without waiting for the crowd to settle. She spoke in the measured cadence of someone who had explained complex things many times and had learned that clarity was the only useful form of communication. The Shelby Cobra 427 was among the most significant American production automobiles ever built. Carroll Shelby had produced the 427 variant in extremely limited numbers before the production line closed in 1967, approximately 300 examples, each individually numbered, each traceable through its CSX prefix chassis code. No two were identical. Every one was documented. This vehicle's chassis number was verifiable against the historical registry. It was not a curiosity. It was not a relic. It was a primary artifact of American automotive history, and it was sitting on a flatbed trailer in the support zone of a charity car show while a tow truck idled 20 feet away. In its current state, Diana said, and her voice did not change register, but the silence around her deepened. This vehicle carries a fair market value of between $1.5 million and $2.5 million. After a proper restoration using period-correct components and authenticated methodology, that number will exceed $3 million. Offered at the right auction with full provenance documentation, it could go considerably higher. Evelyn Holt had not moved from the spot she had been standing in when Diana finished her circuit of the car. She had not moved because there was no direction in which movement seemed appropriate. The journalist's camera operator had shifted position twice in the last minute to find a cleaner angle on Evelyn's face, and Evelyn was aware of this with the precision that public figures develop not comfortable awareness, but awareness nonetheless. Diana turned to Liam. Her attention was direct and professional. "When did you know?" she said. Liam said, "The day I bought it." Diana looked at him steadily. "What did you pay?" He said, $120. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the car, and then back at Liam, and what moved through her expression in that moment was something that people who had known her for years had seen perhaps twice. Uncomplicated, genuine respect. "Most people who find something like this," she said, "sell it within 24 hours. Liam said, "I want to restore it, the right way, not to sell it." He looked at the car when he said it, and not at anyone else in the space. A car like this deserves to be done properly, and then it deserves to be driven. Aria was standing at Liam's side, her hand not holding his but resting near it, close enough that the warmth of her fingers was against the back of his hand. She was looking at the car with the expression of a child who has just understood something that had been in front of her without meaning for a long time. The moment a word you have heard often connects at last to the thing it names. Her tears had dried on her face. Dusty was still tucked under her arm. She looked up at her father, and the quality of that looking was different from anything before that morning. Jackson Reeve had not been visible in the staging area for some time. No one appeared to have noticed when he left. The journalist stepped toward Evelyn with the microphone, and the question was predictable. The journalist knew it was predictable, which was why she asked it. "Miss Holt, do you have a response to what just happened here?" Evelyn had given hundreds of interviews in conditions more hostile than this, and she knew how to find stable ground in a conversation that was moving underneath her. She moved to it now. She spoke about a misunderstanding in the event's logistical coordination, about Holt Motors' deep and ongoing commitment to authentic automotive heritage, about the value the showcase placed on community engagement with classic car culture. The words came out professionally formed and plausibly sincere, and they were not enough. She was standing in the staging area of an event she had organized for 6 consecutive years, and the most important object in the space was a car that she had described as a salvage yard liability 13 minutes ago in front of a running camera. The reordering of attention among the guests was immediate and complete. The collectors who had come to the showcase, several of whom had been doing this long enough to have opinions about Carroll Shelby and chassis numbers, formed a loose cluster around the Cobra. Diana Weston was at the center of this cluster, answering questions in the precise and patient manner of someone who possesses all the information and is not performing that possession. The journalist, after completing the obligatory response segment with Evelyn, moved the camera crew across the staging area and pointed it at the car. That was simply where the story had gone, and where the story went, the camera followed. Evelyn's assistant appeared at her elbow and spoke quietly about a clip that had appeared on a local news aggregator within the last 10 minutes. Someone in the crowd with a phone had caught the exchange from before Diana's arrival, and the segment, drawing the most attention, was not the part about the car's monetary value, but 12 seconds of a small girl in the morning light, tears on her face, stuffed horse under her arm, saying, "Please don't break my dad's car." Evelyn told her assistant to reach the communications director directly and say she would be in touch within the hour. Jackson Reeve did not answer when Evelyn tried to reach him. She tried twice, put the phone back into her jacket pocket, and stood for a moment in the open space of the staging area where the gathering had been, and the quality of her stillness was not the stillness of composure. It was the stillness of someone who has been moving very quickly in a particular direction and has just become aware that the ground ahead is not what they believed it to be. The guests who passed near her nodded politely, with the consideration of people being courteous to a host, but none of them stopped to speak with her. The conversations happening across the plaza were animated and alive about the car, about the chassis number, about Diana Weston's assessment, about the extraordinary fact of a working mechanic identifying a museum-quality automobile by sight at a farm auction, and Evelyn Holt was not part of any of them. The showcase that bore her company's name was unfolding around her, with its full energy and attention directed entirely elsewhere, and this was a feeling she had not experienced before in any space she had organized or occupied. It settled on her with a quiet, particular weight, and she stood in it for a moment, before her trained instincts engaged, and she moved toward the main building with purpose, because she always moved with purpose. She found him at the end of the day, in the staging area, after most of the guests had gone, and the display vehicles were being prepared for transport. Liam was checking the securing straps on the final collector's car, working with the economy of motion that belongs to people who have done a task many hundreds of times. Evelyn came without her assistant. She came without the journalist. She waited until he had finished the strap he was on, and then she said, "I'd like to discuss compensation for the disruption to your work this morning." Liam straightened and looked at her. He was not cold. He was not unfriendly. He was simply clear. "I don't need your money," he said. Evelyn absorbed this. "What do you need then?" she said, and it was a genuine question, which made it different from the questions she had been asking all morning, which had been instruments rather than inquiries. Liam looked across the staging area to where Arya was sitting on the low concrete step near the truck, talking to Dusty in the private voice that was not for anyone else. He looked for a moment, and then he looked back at Evelyn. "You did what you did in front of my daughter," he said. "I don't care about what you said to me, but she is 7 years old, and she stood there and cried because she believed someone was going to destroy something that belongs to her father. What she deserves is an apology, not from a company, from you." Evelyn was quiet. The staging area had emptied enough that there was no ambient noise to fill the silence, and she stood in it without filling it, which was not something she did often. She crossed the staging area and crouched in front of Arya. The motion required her to go to one knee on the concrete, and her skirt was not designed for it. But she did it without hesitating and without drawing attention to the fact that she was doing it. She brought herself level with the child's face. "I said things today that weren't right," she said. "I said them about your father's car, and I said them where you could hear me. I'm sorry for that." Arya looked at her. Then she looked at Dusty. Then she looked back at Evelyn with the clear and unsentimental evaluation of a 7-year-old processing adult behavior through the particular logic of childhood, which does not make allowances for embarrassment or brand management. "Did you know what the car was?" she asked. "No," Evelyn said. "I didn't." Arya nodded at this information as though filing it in the appropriate category. "My dad knew," she said, and the pride in the statement was not pointed, was not triumphant. It was the simple, unadorned pride of a daughter speaking a fact about her father. He always knows the things people don't see. Evelyn had no answer to that. She stood up. She looked at Liam across the staging area, one long look, from the kind of distance that makes honesty unavoidable, and then she turned and walked away. She did not look back. Some things are complete without ceremony, and this was one of them. Before Liam loaded the flatbed for the drive home, Diana Weston found him in the staging area and held out a card-plain, heavy stock, the kind that carries no decoration because it does not need any. She told him she knew the finest restorer in the country for the 427, a man in Arizona who had worked on 3 of the surviving examples and who would understand immediately what was being brought to him. She said the recommendation would carry weight with him. She said one other thing: don't rush it. The car waited 60 years. It can wait a little longer to be done right. She looked at the Cobra once more, the look she sometimes gave to things she found genuinely remarkable, and then she left without sentiment. Liam loaded Arya into the cab of the truck. She was tired in the way children get tired when they have been through something emotionally large. Not sleepy exactly, but settled, as though her body had spent down its reserve capacity for further emergencies, and found none coming. Dusty was on her lap. The truck pulled out of the staging area and onto the street, and the Cobra, covered again under its tarp, rode on the flatbed behind them, with the quiet patience of something that had been waiting a very long time, and had learned that waiting was not the same as losing. They drove without talking for a while. The city thinned around them as they moved toward the outer roads, and the light in the cab shifted from the reflected white of buildings to the broader, warmer light of open sky. Arya was looking out the window at nothing particular when she said, "Dad, why didn't you tell anyone about the car before today?" Liam kept his eyes on the road and thought about the answer for a moment before giving it, because not everyone needs to know what something is worth before they decide whether it deserves respect, he said. The kind of person who needs the price before they can see the value, knowing the price doesn't change them. Arya considered this. "Like me with Dusty," she said. "I don't know what Dusty costs, but I still take care of him." Liam glanced at her. "Exactly like that," he said. Arya leaned her head against the window and was asleep within 5 minutes, Dusty tucked under her arm, breathing the steady and untroubled breath of a child who has decided the day is done. Liam drove in the quiet of the late afternoon. The flatbed behind the truck moved with the weight of the Cobra, a gentle settling and rolling across the road surface that he could feel through the steering column if he paid attention. He paid attention. He always paid attention to the things other people passed without stopping. That was, in the end, the only skill that had ever mattered, and today, as on every other day, it had been enough.